Okay, good evening. My name's Andy Evans. I'm a member of Liverpool Friends of the Earth, and I'm going to talk about one of our specific and more detailed campaigns, which is based around the issues of warmer homes and particularly energy use and energy efficiency in UK households. Um, this obviously has been given real focus by the energy crisis, but it started as a national Friends of the Earth campaign. And I guess the job with this has been, and it's very much ongoing at the moment, to try and give that a local twist and a local focus, really. Um, what I'm going to do is break this down to two parts. I'll give an amount of background information, which, if you're already aware of it, apologies, but it's best, I think, always to assume that information is a good thing, and if we start from the basics. And then I'll talk against that about what we've done in the actual campaign and the structure of that, the problems we faced, and the ways that we're moving forward at the moment. In terms of background, the key thing here, I think, to start off with is the fact that about 25% of the UK CO2 emissions come from our houses, obviously from domestic heating, essentially. And in the UK, we have the leakiest homes in Europe, and that's really a function of the age of the buildings, and also, I think we might say, the problems around, or the lack of building regulations, and the poor demands that have been made on developers and builders over the recent past to actually improve energy efficiency. In terms, when we're talking about energy efficiency, there's really two things we're talking about. We're talking about the method of energy generation or energy supply within households, and we're also talking about the ability of houses to retain the energy that's actually generated. So in effect, insulation. In the UK, we have energy efficiency rating scales. As people will know, if you've sold your house, and I think in the last 25 years, you have to have an energy efficiency certificate, and the rating scale ranges from A to G, with A being really efficient and G being really poor in terms of energy efficiency. The government has targets that all UK homes by the middle of the next decade will be C rated or better. And I probably will come as no surprise to know that at the moment, those targets look a long way off. But we'll come back to that in a while. The average energy efficiency rating for a UK home is a D. In the Northwest region in general, in terms of the if you like, simplistically, the good categories A to C, we're generally below the national average. And of course, the converse of that is that in terms of the poorer categories, we're above the national average. There's a really useful example. I live on the Wirral, and when we were when I was researching for this campaign, I looked at Wirral data, just because obviously it's very local to me. And for those of you who know the area, Wirral, in a sense, although it's very diverse socially and economically, it's obviously got some very affluent areas. But in a parliamentary constituency like Wirral South, which is overall is a moderately affluent area, it's certainly not in general deprived. Research by the Energy Efficiency Infrastructure Group found that in that area, on average, for the A to C rated homes, they are below the national average. And again, conversely, for the poorer ratings, they're above the national average. So energy efficiency ratings in property isn't entirely a function of social deprivation. But that said, and again, it will come as no surprise, those most socially deprived areas in the Wirral and in the UK in general have poor energy efficiency ratings on average for the properties. And to go on a little bit further with that, the poorest ratings of all tend to be for privately rented properties. Owner-occupied properties in general have higher ratings than privately rented properties. And whilst the government's targets for owner-occupied for all properties is a C rating, at present, government legislation only allows a target of an E rating for privately rented properties. So there's a particular problem. There's a general problem, but there's a particular problem for the private rented sector. And as I'm sure most people are aware, the private rented sector has expanded significantly over the last 30 years in terms of the proportion of UK citizens who live in those properties. So that's a lot of background there. If we think, as I say, it's not just a function of social deprivation, but clearly that's a key issue. But if you think about areas such as West Wirral, which is a really affluent area in general, there are actually a lot of properties in this area which are large, which may be lived in by people who are retired. So their actual income level at this point in time isn't huge. And actually, they're older properties, so their energy efficiency ratings are likely to be low. And as we're all finding this winter, there are a lot of people, even in affluent areas, who are, if not living in absolute fuel poverty in terms of the formal definition of that, they are struggling with energy and heating. The other bits of background information you need to know is that the Liverpool City region was successful in gaining a funding of £60 million from the Department for Environment and Business and Environment back in the middle of last year, and that is being spent at the moment, still ongoing, on upgrading the energy efficiency of properties across the 5 constituents councils on Merseyside. At the moment, we're not quite sure how much of that money has been spent. The original end date for the project was the end of this month, the end of March, but it may yet be extended. We're trying to find out at the present time. But in terms of the number of properties that have been impacted by that, and they clearly have, it's clearly a positive scheme. But in terms of the impact, we're talking about several tens of thousands of properties, which, as you can imagine, is not insignificant, but equally leaves a huge number of properties on Merseyside that still need their energy efficiency needs addressing. In terms of future expenditure, if we go back to those Wirral figures that I gave you then, at 2021 prices, and that has an exclamation mark after it, obviously, it was estimated in South Wirral that there'd need to be an expenditure of around £12 million per annum between now and the middle of the next decade to get their properties up to the target C rating. So that will give you an idea of the scales of expenditure that are needed to achieve this. There are a number of criticisms of the Liverpool City region project, and as I say, whilst overall it's undeniable that there's been lots of positive impact from it, it's involved a lot expenditure on energy sources. So, for example, a lot of people have had solar panels installed as part of the scheme. A criticism that could be made is that the simplest and most cost-effective way to improve the energy efficiency of homes in our region and nationally is to insulate them properly. Insulation is relatively cheap. There are many of our homes that are just poorly insulated. So instead, obviously, installing solar panels typically will cost £10,000 to £15,000 for an average property. You could do a lot of insulation for that money in a wide range of properties. So there are criticisms of that. The key thing, I almost titled our campaign as Just Insulate, because really one of the messages of Friends of the Earth we want to get across is the number one priority in terms of home energy efficiency improvement is insulation. As simple as that. You know, people don't have sufficient loft insulation. They may or may not have a property that's suitable for cavity wall insulation, but for older properties, you know, there are external, internal insulation, wall insulation, underfloor insulation that can be carried out. So that's really one of the main drivers. So against all of that background, the problem was what would a campaign look like? And it's really divided into 2 parts. There's a local political element to it, and then there's a local awareness raising element. So if I talk about the political element first, we've obviously looked to press our local councils and the Liverpool City region. But in terms of local council, the key thing that we looked to press was in terms of their actions on the private rented sector, because that's the first priority. As I said, it's where the greatest problems lie, and therefore we tried to tackle that first. Liverpool City Council has actually been picked out for praise by Friends of the Earth because it runs a scheme for private landlords, which is a part carrot, part stick scheme. They've introduced licensing for landlords, but also introduced grants for home improvement. So they've got a really structured approach to trying to improve the efficiency ratings of private rented properties. And a simple question that we asked of the other member council of the city region was, given that one council is instigated that, is that going to happen amongst the other councils? it's interesting. We've had one response to a very detailed letter asking for information around that issue, and that came back from Wirral. And the essence of that response is they have done so to a limited extent, but they basically haven't got the resources and staffing to implement it as Liverpool City Council have done. The City Council accessed some additional funding in order to put that scheme in place. And this is one of the frustrations politically, is that, you know, in fairness to our local councils, we can put pressure on them, but they are hamstrung by obviously the limited funds that they have around this. If you're aware of local council funding, for most councils in this area, it will be they'll be often receiving a fifth of what they would have been receiving overall in funding in, say, 2012. So, you know, they're all struggling under the effects of years of austerity, etc. So it is very difficult, and it's frustrating, because obviously the key holders here inevitably overall is central government. And if you cast an eye over the budget yesterday, unfortunately, you may have seen that there was absolutely nothing in there to address home energy improvement. Of course, what there was in there was a commitment to keep subsidising households' energy costs. And of course, essentially that means handing over taxpayers' money to the energy companies. And what we would like to see done with that is something constructive, sustainable, and more long-term in terms of subsidising insulation. But we keep up with that. We keep pressurising, trying to link up with local politicians. We've obviously got connections here with the Green Party on Wirral, who are quite strong, because Wirral Council's a hung council, and the Green Party can hold the balance of power. So that's really useful. So we keep going with that. The other prong to the campaign that I've just started working on is local awareness raising, and essentially that involves drawing up a leaflet that aims to make people in local neighbourhoods aware of energy efficiency issues. Now, obviously, you could say everybody is at the moment because of the energy crisis this winter, but to make them aware of the measures they can take to upgrade their homes, to make them aware of what the costs of that are, what the medium and long-term savings will be, and to direct them to sources of information around those issues. And then also to let them know what grants and funding support is available to them. And we're trying to do that on a really local basis. And whilst I'd call it a leaflet campaign, the real drive I'm hoping with that will be that it'll go via social media. So as most people of my age do, I talk to my children about this because they know a lot more about it than I do. And I think we've now got a grip on how we can shape up a campaign using Facebook and Instagram, essentially to try and to work through local community groups, faith groups, schools, and then maybe some hard copy leaflets out to GP surgeries and the like, to try and disseminate the information we want to try and get out there. All of that said, and we kind of plug away with that one of the frustration is that when you come to put on any source of information to local groups, anything about the grant funding and the support, the financial support that's available to them to upgrade their home in terms of energy efficiency, at the moment, the honest truth is there's very little available out there. It's not quite true for people who are on various forms of benefit, because there's a scheme called Eco4 and Eco Plus. I won't elaborate on that right now, but there is potential funding for improvements for people who are on benefits. But outside of that, right now, there's very little available. I heard yesterday on a post-budget interview that Grant Shapps is saying that there will be some significant announcements about government expenditure and support for energy improvements in the near future, and he was waxing lyrical about that. But we wait to see what that is. But as things stand at this point of time, as I'm talking about it, currently the central government funding that's available for home improvements is limited, and that's of course in the present cost of living crisis. It's very difficult to try and persuade people that this is a good idea. They may take that on board, but they've got to have essentially some financial wherewithal to actually put measures in place. But to go back to kind of close the circle on all that, the one thing that we are trying to emphasize, however, is despite that, still the most effective thing that people can do is to get the homes insulated properly, and that's not a hugely expensive process. That's a much cheaper process, obviously, than having alternative energy sources installed, be it air source heat pumps, solar panels, or whatever it might be. So it's trying to get that message across via this community information. That's really the next stage of our campaign. And that's really where we're at with things right now. So it is that this kind of dual prong of trying to keep up political pressure, trying to liaise with people locally, particularly local politicians who are going to be sympathetic, but equally trying to persuade those politicians who might not be as instinctively sympathetic. We'll try and persuade them that there will be people, they will be constituents of theirs who they might not initially realize are likely to be suffering or very close to suffering from fuel poverty. So that all of our local politicians, we're trying to argue, have a vested interest in getting behind this, and then trying to get community information out there, and particularly to try to push insulation for people. And that's it. Thank you.